Tamm, First Generation, the Autobiography. Read by the Timekeys Ramona. Chapter 16, 1978, The Pirate Planet. Pieces of 8. After the claustrophobia of the BBC studios while recording the Rebus operation, it was wonderful to have the wide open spaces of Wales to look forward to. We started the rehearsals for the Pirate Planet, as always, at the Acton Hilton. Graham Williams was absent, having broken his leg whilst on holiday in Madeira, where he was now stuck. So Anthony Reed, our script editor, was acting in loco producer, as it were, as well as doing his own difficult job. K9, voiced by John Leeson, had not featured overmuch in Rebus, but had a lot to do in this story. Not least of all, a fight with another mechanical creature. John not only read the part at every read-through, but turned up each day at rehearsal to crawl around on the floor on his hands and knees in artful doggy fashion. I was amazed to hear later that, in fact, he was not contracted to do this, but came along out of a desire to assist us with our orientation, and very helpful it was, too, in realizing the character of this little tin dog for us, and for John himself. Instead of going into the studio to be met with the anonymous mechanical device operated by remote control, and trying to react to it, we had the memory of the character John had created in rehearsal to play to. This enriched the script and the story for actors and viewers alike. The dog had a limited capacity of movement, even though it was the Mach 2 version of the design, supposedly superior in every way to the first. Alas, it still could only move over completely flat surfaces, and much time was taken up in the studio with lay little paths for him to trundle along, not always obediently, while John did his voice from behind a screen. My part in the Pirate Planet had become more controlling, and Ramona took some initiative in operating the TARDIS and being in charge of the jelly babies, which made a change. Tom kept trying to snatch the bag of sweets away from me and reclaiming ownership, but I did not let him. We had established a very good working relationship by this time, remarkably quickly, and our humor alone shone through as we joked on set and off. We had John's witty presence to play to in the studio and at rehearsal, and consequently the story worked very successfully on all levels. The script was a very funny one and heavy on blue screen, CSO, cover separation overlay scenes, with a great deal of special effects. These were quite challenging for our director, Pennant Roberts, as in those days we only had analog technology to work with. Our writer was a virtual unknown, namely, the late and great Douglas Adams, who had left Cambridge 4 years earlier. At the same time as he was commissioned to write The Pirate Planet, Douglas was also given the green light to go ahead with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy for radio, which has become a cult phenomenon. He wrote frantically day and night. The story relied heavily on Treasure Island in parts, especially in the relationship between the characters of the captain and Mr. Feebly, played to such fabulous comedy effect by Bruce Purchas and Andrew Robertson, respectively. The captain had a robot parrot on his shoulder, the polyphase Avatron, which was as highly imaginative as the rest of Douglas's script. He created the role of Queen Zanzia for Rosalind Lloyd, and by old Radha chum David Warwick played Kimmis. Moolah was played by Primmy Townsend, who turned out to be the partner of my old agent Roger Carey, so it was lovely to eventually get back in touch with him. It seemed to me that, throughout the whole of the Key to Time season, the female guest characters, in keeping with the more powerful status of the assistant's role, were becoming stronger and stronger. Zanzia was just one example, but there were many more, admittedly, usually villainesses, but all juicy parts and enjoyed greatly by the actresses who played them. The program controllers loved the script, although dubious as to whether there was a touch too much humor in it. They took science fiction very seriously, and quite rightly too. I am glad they decided to keep it all in, though. It worked well with the way Tom and I were going with our on-screen relationship, and I know from fan feedback that the audience loved a bit of fun, too. There was a line drawn, however. Tom had a scene in which he had to say, "Where's the daring do in that?" He was dying to change it to, "Where's the daring do in that?" which had us all falling about at the read-through, but was sternly given the boot by the sixth floor. Shame. After the read-through, we were ferried down to Gloucestershire in the BBC transport bus, which dropped us off in the middle of the most glorious scenery at a country hotel. It was idyllic, although the weather was somewhat chilly. The cast were all of a similar age group, and it was rather like a loud and noisy party when we all adjourned to the bar later on. We always had a great deal of fun when we were together, although an early night was on the cards this time, to be ready for filming the next day. Our first location was at the Berkeley nuclear power station, which loomed menacingly on the horizon in the middle of nowhere. The interiors, which Pennant had chosen to represent the captain's engine room in the story, were particularly spectacular, with cavernous ceilings and aptly complicated-looking machinery. We were all a little nervous about entering this nuclear facility, as we were old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis and the subsequent screenings of dire warnings about nuclear power and its side effects. We had to be screened very thoroughly before and after entry, and had to scrub ourselves in a shower in case of any atomic particles adhering to our persons. We joked about lighting up in the dark, but no one seemed to suffer any after effect, thank goodness. Well, not that I know of, anyway. I was relieved to leave this location, and looked forward to another jolly evening in yet another hotel bar. The unit bus took us to Gwent, where a great time was had by all, before setting off to our second location the next day, the Danya Ogov Caves near Abercroft Powys. The caves were dark, cold, damp, and smelly. There was nowhere to change, so I had to knit behind a tree with a costume designer's assistant and struggle into the tight white trousers and thigh-high white boots, which looked great on, but took about half an hour to get into. Another stunning costume, but so uncomfortable. Still, it was worth it to get the positive feedback from the fans, I think. We seemed to be down in the caves forever. I did not tell anyone that I suffered from a mild form of claustrophobia when underground. I had had to hastily leave a gold mine in South Africa when I was being given a guided tour, whilst on my promotional tour for the Odyssephile. Mind you, that had been 1 mile below ground. I was feeling slightly uneasy here too, though, and tried to distract myself with gazing at the spectacular stalactites and stalagmites that filled the cathedral-sized spaces. They were like nothing I'd ever witnessed. I'd seen some in my home county of Yorkshire at the caves in Knaresborough, but these were on a much bigger scale. Filming over, I clambered thankfully back above ground, stripped off behind the tree, now under pouring rain, and asked the costume assistant where the next day's location was. "A coal mine," she chirped back. "Oh, no." The next day we set off for the big pit in Blainoven, where we found ourselves in a mine shaft. Luckily, we did not have to work in an enclosed space, as the large wire cage we were to shoot the scene in was in fact a lift. It had plenty of air and was spacious too, so I breathed a sigh of relief. Too soon, as it turned out, as the darn thing got stuck during rehearsal and we were left mid-air for about 10 minutes. I hoped it would not come crashing down, and it seemed we were stuck in there for an age, but the technical operator managed to get it going again with a loud shudder, and we descended safely. Was I glad to get out of there. So much for location filming in the wide open spaces, and I had been so looking forward to it. We did have some scenes in the open air, though, notably at Cowtie Mountain, which made up for the uncomfortable interiors, and the scenery of Wales was spectacular. It was my first visit there, and reminded me very much of Yorkshire, so I felt quite at home. Back in London, we recorded the studio scenes, which involved plenty of the CSO mentioned earlier. It was a new experience to be acting against the blue backdrop, keeping still and pretending it was somewhere else entirely. It all looked okay in the finished product, although I must say the old episodes of Who are so far behind the new series with its immense budget for technical effects. The year The Key to Time was screened coincided with the release of Star Wars, and one could only make unkind comparisons as far as special effects were concerned, with the BBC coming off worst. The particular prop which I had most difficulty with was the tracer, which always had to be secreted somewhere on my person, and which the wardrobe department therefore always had to accommodate with secret pockets sewn into my costumes. Not only did I have the fiddle of producing it smoothly and effortlessly from wherever it was artfully hidden, but the wire attached to it had to be disguised somehow, usually by being wound around my bracelet, so I had an extra handicap every time I used it, as well as a heavy battery pack strapped to my waist or pack. All in all, I think the Pirate Planet worked well, given the ambitious story and the limited time and money we had in those days. However, although I had fun working on it, it is not my favorite story to view. The storylines are disjointed and never seem to cohere. I still feel confused when I watch it. as I did when I had to do the DVD commentaries, for example, and find the plot difficult to follow. Many fans loved this story, however, as they did the whole Key to Time series. The quest of finding the segments became a challenge to watch, as viewers guessed what object, place, or person the new piece would be represented by. Mind you, there was a huge public outcry at the beginning of the season when it was mooted that Doctor Who would be moved from its usual Saturday slot to Thursday. The BBC soon backed down on this as hundreds of angry fans wrote in to protest and saved the day. It says a lot for Auntie Beeb that viewers' opinions were taken seriously in those days, unlike now, alas. At the time of writing, the corporation is in trouble over executives' fees and the justification of spending license payers' money. Around this time, the publicity machine was once again thrown into a frenzy, as I was asked constantly to appear on TV magazine programs, giving interviews about my incipient appearance on this highly popular show. The viewing figures for The Key to Time, when it was shown, ran into the high millions. I often had to leave rehearsal to go off and do a quick TV interview. One particular lunchtime, I was picked up on a BMW motorbike and whisked through London to visit a studio where I recorded my piece, then back to Acton again, as the driver weaved in and out of the heavy London traffic at high speed. It was so exhilarating and brought back memories of my bronze hotch days. I still had my little Minnie, which was serving me well as transport to and from rehearsal, although I did not trust it to manage a long journey. One morning, as I was trundling along the A40, uphill, luckily, the steering wheel suddenly came off in my hands. I hastily slowed down using the gears and managed to stop by the side of the road just before a huge lorry bore down on me from behind. Whew! A narrow escape. I stared sadly at the steering wheel and tried for a short while to refix it to its shaft, but nothing doing. My poor car had expired, and no mistake. It was one of several that had died, all of them being basically clapped-out old bangers. I was very fond of my series of minis, though, and although this one turned out to be irreparable, I soon purchased another, slightly newer one. My fee on the program was not high, £150 per episode to be precise, and though that sum went a little further than it does now, it was still not enough to justify the purchase of a new car. Tom was as intriguing as ever, and had a habit of appearing in the mornings dressed in a shirt, Oxford bags, and a jacket on top with what appeared to be the handle of a toothbrush sticking out of the top pocket. I plucked up courage one day to ask him what it was, and he produced, surprise, surprise, a toothbrush, explaining quite openly that, as he was footloose and fancy-free, he always carried one around him in case he found himself staying the night somewhere, and was therefore ready for any eventuality. His female fan following was huge, and there were always women throwing themselves at him wherever he went. He was also very much in demand for voiceovers, and sometimes, when he had a rare break in rehearsals, he would nip on the tube to Soho, where he would record a commercial soundtrack, usually in about 20 minutes or so, and then nip back in time to rehearse his next scene. I did admire the man's energy, which was prolific. He told me the story of his life over the coming weeks, and I was impressed to learn that he had been cloistered in a monastery between the ages of 15 and 21, and then had joined the army to do his national service for 2 years. Having lived in such male-oriented societies for the formative years of his life, it was hardly surprising that he was now making up for lost time, as far as the ladies were concerned. One studio day, he came into the actors' canteen at the White Lane Studios looking even wilder-eyed than usual, and proceeded to tell John and me a hairy tale. A female fan had been forcibly removed from the security barrier, where she had been loitering around for hours, waiting for him. She had claimed to be his girlfriend, which Tom had denied. The story emerged that, the previous week, Tom had had a day off and had set off to a suburban recording studio for a voiceover job. Having arrived with time to spare, he decided to check the address, and rummaging around in his pocket for the details, had found a fan letter from a lady who, coincidentally, lived nearby. Tom being Tom, he had impulsively bounded up her garden path and knocked on the door. The poor woman nearly died of shock when she opened it and saw her favorite TV hero standing there. Our aforesaid hero had invited himself in and had a cup of tea with her before setting off again for his work appointment. Now the fan had convinced herself that there was more to his visit than was intended. Tom was merely killing time in a highly original and expedient way, where she had had the most thrilling and romantic afternoon of her life. John and I were horrified at his tale, but also highly entertained. I could not believe that anyone could be so naive. Tom was so direct and open, which was his great strength as an actor and a human being, but it was also his downfall in this instance, as the demented fan kept turning up day after day to plague him. I think eventually he had a quiet word with her, and she finally gave up. but the consequences could have been dire. There were no examples back then of stalking and dangerous threats from fans as there are now, so Tom had a very lucky escape. I could only marvel at the sheer gall of the bloke. What a cove.